They beat her in the street and walked away, until one cowboy stopped everything. It was a quiet evening in the small town of Willow Creek. The sun had set hours ago, leaving the streets bathed in a soft, dim light. Only the occasional flickering street lamp and the distant hum of a car engine broke the stillness. Most of the town's residents were tucked inside their homes, preparing for the night, leaving the streets almost empty. Maria walked carefully along the cracked sidewalk, her mind full of the day's events. She had spent the evening helping her younger brother with homework and running a few errands for her mother. Her bag was heavy with groceries, and she could feel the tiredness in her shoulders. Maria preferred walking home rather than waiting for the bus. The fresh night air helped her clear her mind after a long day, and the quiet streets gave her a sense of peace. She hummed softly to herself as she walked, trying to ignore the ache in her feet and shoulders. Occasionally, a cold gust of wind would brush past her, making the leaves on the sidewalk rustle. She pulled her jacket tighter around her, grateful for its warmth, and quickened her pace slightly. The town seemed almost deserted that night, which was unusual. Usually, someone would be walking a dog or returning from the local diner, but tonight there was nothing but silence. As Maria passed a dark alley, she felt a small shiver run down her spine. It was nothing unusual, just a shadow, a trick of the dim light, but she could not shake a sudden feeling of being watched. She told herself to relax, to focus on the familiar path she had walked countless times. The houses were old but well kept, with gardens full of flowers and neat fences lining the sidewalk. She could see the lights of her house at the end of the street and felt a small rush of relief. Then, out of nowhere, she heard footsteps behind her. They were uneven and heavy, not like the soft, casual steps of someone walking home like her. Her stomach tightened. She glanced over her shoulder but saw nothing in the shadows. She told herself again that she was being silly, that the streets were empty and there was no one there. She picked up her pace. The footsteps quickened in response. A cold knot of fear formed in her chest. Maria's mind raced as she tried to think of what to do. She considered running, but she knew that the attackers could easily catch up. Her heart pounded loudly in her chest as the shadows behind her grew closer. Suddenly, two men stepped out from the darkness. They were tall and wore dark jackets that hid their faces. Maria froze, her body locked in shock. Before she could react, one of the men grabbed her arm with surprising strength, twisting it painfully. Maria gasped and tried to pull away, but his grip was firm. The second man pushed her harshly to the ground, and she hit the cracked pavement with a painful thud. The impact sent a sharp jolt of pain through her back, and she felt the gravel dig into her palms. She struggled to get up, but the two men were stronger, holding her down and laughing cruelly. "Give us your bag," one of them sneered. Maria shook her head frantically, her voice trembling. "Please don't, just take it," she stammered, trying to stay calm. But her words seemed to make them angrier. They began to hit her, their fists connecting with her sides and shoulders. Pain exploded through her body with every strike, and tears filled her eyes. She tried to curl up to protect herself, but they were relentless. Her bag spilled onto the street, groceries scattering everywhere. Apples rolled into the gutter, and a bottle of milk cracked open, leaking across the pavement. Maria tried to call out for help, but her voice came out as a strangled sob. The street was still empty, and no one came running. She realized with growing terror that she was completely alone. Her mind raced through thoughts of what could happen if they didn't stop. She had heard stories, of course, stories of people being hurt when no one came to help, but she had never imagined she would be in such a situation. Every instinct screamed at her to fight back, to escape, but her body was battered and weak, and the men's strength was overwhelming. After what felt like an eternity, the attackers finally released her. They stepped back, laughing cruelly as they picked up the bag and scattered groceries. Maria lay on the ground, her chest heaving, trying to catch her breath. Her clothes were torn and her body ached all over. Her hands and knees were scraped and bleeding from the fall and the pavement. She wanted to cry out again, but the words stuck in her throat. She felt small, vulnerable, and utterly helpless. The men walked away without looking back, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. Maria lay there for a few moments, trying to gather herself. She pressed her hands against the ground to steady herself, feeling the rough texture of the pavement beneath her fingers. The sound of the wind in the empty street was the only thing that filled the silence. Slowly, she began to sit up, her body trembling from fear and pain. She looked around, hoping for anyone, to be there, but the street remained empty. She could see her house at the end of the street, lights glowing warmly through the windows, but it felt impossibly far away. Shakily, Maria dragged herself to her feet. Her legs wobbled beneath her, and she nearly fell again, but she refused to give up. She gathered the scattered groceries as best as she could, though some were ruined or broken. Her jacket was torn, and her hair was messy, sticking to her sweaty face. Every step toward home was painful, each movement sending sharp jolts through her bruised body. Her mind was a storm of fear and disbelief. How could something like this happen in her quiet town? She had always felt safe here. Finally, after what felt like an endless walk, Maria reached the corner of her street. She paused, leaning against a lamppost for support. Her breaths came in shallow gasps, and her hands shook as she tried to steady them. For a moment, she allowed herself to cry quietly, tears streaming down her face. It was not just the physical pain that hurt. It was the sudden loss of safety, the realization that people could be cruel, and that the world was not always as peaceful as it seemed. Even as she wiped her tears and tried to regain composure, Maria knew she would never forget this night. The fear, the pain, and the helplessness would linger for a long time. Yet beneath the terror, a small part of her held on to the hope that help might still come, that someone might intervene, that she would not always be alone. She took a deep breath, straightened her back as best as she could, and continued her slow, painful walk home, praying that the ordeal was finally over. The sound of Maria's uneven footsteps echoed softly down the empty street. Her body still ached from the attack, and each movement reminded her of how vulnerable she had been. The bruises forming on her arms and legs throbbed painfully, and the cuts on her hands stung whenever they brushed against her jacket. She clutched the torn straps of her grocery bag, the ruined fruits and broken bread pressing against her chest. Each step toward home felt like a battle, but she forced herself forward. Somewhere in the distance, she hoped someone would notice, someone would help, but the quiet night gave her no comfort. Not far from the street where Maria struggled, a lone figure rode along a dusty path on the outskirts of town. His horse moved steadily, kicking up small clouds of dust as they passed. Hank, a local cowboy known for his calm and observant nature, had spent the day working on a neighboring ranch, helping mend fences and check on the cattle. The sun had dipped below the horizon hours ago, and he was heading back to his small home near the town. He enjoyed these quiet rides at night, the solitude helping him think and reflect on the day's work. The night air was cool and smelled faintly of pine and freshly turned soil. Hank was used to noticing small details while riding. Years of working with animals had taught him to watch carefully, to notice movements and changes in the environment. That night, as he guided his horse along the familiar path, he saw something unusual. Shadows flickered across the street ahead, and for a moment he thought it might just be the wind moving through the trees. But then he noticed a figure struggling to rise, a small, trembling form stumbling forward. Hank's sharp eyes recognized immediately that something was wrong. He urged his horse closer, keeping a careful distance so as not to startle the riderless figure. As he approached, he could see her clearly. A young woman, clothes torn and smudged with dirt, her hair falling messily across her face. She seemed frozen for a moment, sitting on the sidewalk, staring at the ground as if she could not believe what had just happened. Hank's heart tightened. Without a second thought, he dismounted, the familiar weight of his boots grounding him. He walked toward her slowly, speaking in a calm, steady voice. "Hey there, are you all right?" he asked gently. His voice was soft but carried an authority that immediately made Maria look up. Her wide, frightened eyes met his, and for the first time since the attack, she felt a flicker of hope. Hank's presence was reassuring, like a strong branch to hold onto during a storm. I think so," she whispered, her voice trembling. They hit me and they took my bag." Tears welled up in her eyes again, but Hank knelt down beside her, keeping his tone calm. "It's okay. You're safe now. I saw what happened. I'm right here." Maria tried to speak more, to explain, but the words caught in her throat. Hank didn't push her. He simply stayed by her side, letting her breathe, letting her process the shock. After a few moments, she took a shaky hand and clutched his sleeve. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice barely audible. They just left me there." "You're not alone," Hank said firmly. "I won't leave you. Let's get you somewhere safe and then we can call for help. Do you know where you live?" Maria nodded, pointing weakly toward the end of the street. Her house was only a few blocks away, but the distance felt enormous to her, her body still quivering with fear. Hank assessed her condition quickly. There were no serious injuries that required immediate medical attention, but she was bruised, bleeding lightly from small cuts and obviously shaken. He knew it would be important to keep her calm and moving steadily. "All right," he said, helping her to her feet. She leaned heavily on him, her arms weak and trembling. Hank adjusted the bag of groceries as best as he could, knowing that the broken fruits could wait. Step by step, they began to walk toward her home. Hank's horse followed quietly behind, guided by the reins he held loosely in one hand. He kept his eyes open, scanning the street for any signs that the attackers might return. Maria clung to him, her trust growing with every reassuring word. As they walked, Maria began to speak in fits and starts. She told him what had happened, how she had been walking home when the men had appeared from the shadows, how they had struck her and taken her bag. Hank listened carefully, nodding occasionally, never interrupting. His presence gave her the courage to continue, to tell someone what had happened instead of carrying the fear and shame alone. They laughed," Maria said, her voice quivering. "I don't understand why. I didn't do anything to them." She paused, swallowing hard. I was so scared." "I know," Hank said softly. "It's not your fault. Some people make bad choices, but you did everything you could. You stayed strong. That matters." Maria glanced at him, noticing the calm determination in his eyes. It was unlike anything she had seen that night. No fear, no panic, just a steady assurance that made her feel safe. She realized that even though the street had seemed deserted and dangerous, she was not truly alone. For the first time in what felt like hours, she felt a sense of hope that she might actually make it home safely. Hank guided her carefully, encouraging her to take slow, steady steps. They passed the same dark alley where the attackers had appeared. Maria's stomach tightened at the memory, but Hank's steady hand on her shoulder reminded her to keep moving. She felt the tension in her body slowly ease, step by step, as they moved past the site of the attack. By the time they reached the corner near her home, Maria's breathing was still shaky, but she was no longer paralyzed by fear. She saw her house, the familiar windows glowing warmly, and tears of relief filled her eyes. She had never been so grateful for something so simple as the sight of her own front door. Hank stopped at a respectful distance, letting her regain her composure. "Can you make it the rest of the way?" he asked gently. Maria nodded, managing a small, grateful smile. "I think so." "Thank you, really, thank you." She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the night beginning to lift, at least slightly. She had survived, and now someone was there to help her process what had happened. Hank stayed with her until she reached her front steps. "Do you want me to stay while you call someone?" he asked. "Yes, please," Maria replied. Her hands were still shaking too much to hold her phone steady. Hank stood nearby as she dialed the police, explaining what had happened. He answered the officers' questions when they arrived, providing clear details about the attackers' appearance and the direction they had fled. Maria felt safer knowing that Hank was there, supporting her, and that the authorities were taking her situation seriously. As the officers thanked Hank and took statements, Maria's neighbors came out to see what had happened. Many had heard the commotion or seen the aftermath from their windows, and their expressions were a mix of concern and disbelief. Hank remained calm, answering questions and reassuring Maria that she had done the right thing by seeking help. When the police finally assured Maria that she was safe and that they would do everything possible to find the men, she felt a wave of relief. She knew the road ahead, reporting the incident, recovering from the injuries, and facing the emotional impact would not be easy, but she also knew she was not alone. Hank had arrived when she needed help the most, providing not just physical support but a sense of security and human kindness in a moment that had felt hopeless. Before leaving, Hank offered her one final piece of advice. "Take it slow," he said. "Don't rush your healing. And remember, you're stronger than you think. One night like this doesn't define you." Maria nodded, feeling the truth in his words. She watched him mount his horse and ride away, a quiet figure disappearing into the night, leaving behind a sense of hope and the knowledge that one person's courage could make a tremendous difference. That night, Maria learned that even in the darkest moments, someone willing to help could change everything. The next morning, Willow Creek seemed like a completely different place. The streets that had felt empty and frightening the night before were now bright with sunlight. Children ran to school, neighbors tended their gardens, and the distant hum of the town waking up filled the air. Yet, for Maria, the events of the previous night were still very real. Every movement, every sound reminded her of the fear she had felt and the pain she had endured. Even the small bruise on her arm, darkening as it healed, seemed to tell the story over and over again. Maria sat on the edge of her bed, her bag of groceries unpacked but still scattered on the kitchen counter. She moved slowly, still cautious, as if expecting something to go wrong at any moment. She tried to focus on small, normal tasks, making breakfast, watering the plants by the window, checking on her younger brother. But her mind kept drifting back to the street, to the shadows, and to the men who had attacked her. She felt a lingering tension in her shoulders, a tightness in her chest, and a gnawing sense of vulnerability that refused to leave. Her mother noticed immediately that something was off. Maria's mother had always been protective, but yesterday, seeing her daughter so shaken had been terrifying. She approached cautiously, placing a hand on Maria's shoulder. "Are you feeling all right, sweetie?" she asked softly. Maria nodded but didn't speak. She didn't need to explain. Her mother already understood that the night had changed everything. By mid-morning, the police called back. The officers had gathered statements, checked nearby security cameras, and interviewed neighbors. The news that Maria's attackers had been spotted heading toward the edge of town brought both relief and anxiety. Relief because they had a lead, anxiety because it reminded her of the danger she had faced. The officers assured her that they would do everything possible to track the men down, and that she had done the right thing by reporting the incident immediately. Hank's role in the report became clear during this time. The officers spoke highly of the cowboy's careful observations. His descriptions had been precise: height, clothing, even the way the attackers moved. Without his calm intervention, Maria's account might have been harder to confirm. The thought of Hank staying by her side the night before brought tears to Maria's eyes again. She realized that his kindness had been more than just physical help. It had been emotional support that reminded her she wasn't completely alone in the world. As the day went on, neighbors who had heard about the attack started stopping by. Some brought food, others simply came to check on her and offer comforting words. The town's sense of community, which had felt invisible during the attack, began to show itself in small, caring ways. Maria found herself talking more, telling people what had happened, and slowly letting go of some of the fear she had carried in silence. It was not easy, but each conversation, each act of kindness, chipped away at the anxiety that had been building inside her. Meanwhile, the town's attention turned to the attackers. People who had remained inside their homes the previous night were now talking openly about what had happened. Some admitted they had been scared to intervene when they saw the men attacking Maria, afraid for their own safety. Others expressed frustration that the town had not been more vigilant in keeping the streets safe. The incident sparked a larger conversation about community responsibility, about watching out for one another, and about the importance of stepping in, or at least calling for help, when someone was in danger. Hank, in his quiet and unassuming way, became a local hero without intending to be. He did not seek recognition, nor did he want praise for simply helping someone in need. Yet his courage and quick thinking made a real difference. People began sharing the story with neighbors, friends, and even local shops, describing how a lone cowboy had noticed a crime in progress and intervened with calm determination. His actions reminded everyone that even in a small town, one person could make a significant difference. Maria, encouraged by the support she received, began to regain a sense of normalcy. She returned to her usual routines, school, work, chores, but did so with a new awareness. She took precautions she had never considered before, like walking with a friend when possible, keeping her phone close, and avoiding dark alleys. These actions were not born of fear, but of a practical sense of caution, a way to take control of her life again. Each day, the bruises faded slightly, and her confidence grew, little by little. The police made progress in identifying the attackers, thanks in part to Hank's observations and Maria's statements. Officers patrolled the area more frequently, and the town took steps to make the streets safer at night, including adding more streetlights and encouraging neighbors to look out for each other. Maria felt a growing sense of relief that her experience might prevent future incidents for others. She began to see her own trauma as a catalyst for change, understanding that her voice and actions mattered. As the week passed, Maria found herself thinking often about Hank. She wanted to thank him properly, not just for saving her that night, but for giving her the courage to speak, to report the crime, and to begin healing. She remembered the calm in his voice, the steady reassurance in his presence, and the way he had looked at her not with pity, but with respect and care. It was a rare and meaningful gesture, and she realized that moments like this, small acts of bravery and kindness, could have lasting effects. Finally, Maria decided to visit the ranch where Hank lived. She was nervous, unsure of how he would react, but she knew it was important to express her gratitude. When she arrived, Hank was surprised but welcoming, offering her a chair and a glass of water. Maria spoke simply, honestly, and directly, telling him how much his help had meant, how it had changed her experience, and how it had reminded her of the goodness that could exist even in a frightening world. Hank listened quietly, smiling modestly, and told her that anyone would have done the same in his position. But Maria knew better. Not everyone had acted as he had, and she felt a profound sense of gratitude. During that visit, Maria realized something important. Courage was not only about fighting or confronting danger directly. Sometimes, courage was about noticing a situation, taking the right action, and providing support when someone needed it most. Hank's quiet heroism was a lesson she would carry for the rest of her life, a reminder that one person could make a difference simply by choosing to act. In the following days, Maria continued to recover emotionally. She spoke with counselors at school who helped her process the trauma, and she began journaling her experiences, writing down not only the fear and pain, but also the moments of hope and support. She realized that sharing her story could help others, that her experience, while difficult, could inspire positive change. She began to understand that healing was not just physical. It was about reclaiming confidence, trust, and a sense of safety in the world again. Hank returned quietly to his routine on the ranch, tending to his animals, mending fences, and riding his horse across the open fields. He did not seek attention for his actions, nor did he dwell on them. Yet in the town, people continued to talk about him, sharing the story of the cowboy who had intervened at the right moment. His bravery had not only helped Maria, but had reminded the entire town of the importance of community, vigilance, and kindness. By the end of the week, Maria began to feel stronger. She could walk the streets without fear, she could smile without thinking of the previous night, and she could engage with her neighbors with confidence. She had survived a terrifying experience, but she had also discovered resilience within herself. The memory of Hank's calm, steady presence stayed with her, a reminder that in life, even small gestures of courage could create lasting impact. Maria's story began to spread beyond the town. Teachers, friends, and even local newspapers spoke of the incident, not to sensationalize the attack, but to highlight the importance of bravery, community support, and the role of ordinary citizens in keeping each other safe. Maria realized that her own actions, reporting the attack, speaking out, and seeking help, were just as important as Hank's intervention. Together, their courage had created a ripple effect, inspiring change and awareness throughout the community. By the time the sun set again over Willow Creek, Maria had begun to feel a sense of closure. The fear that had gripped her the night of the attack had been met with courage, kindness, and support. She understood that life could be unpredictable and sometimes frightening, but she also knew that moments of bravery and care could transform those dark times into stories of hope. The morning after Maria's story began circulating through Willow Creek, the town was buzzing with a mix of concern and determination. The previous night's events had shaken everyone, but they had also sparked action. People who had been hesitant to get involved before now understood that safety was a shared responsibility, and they were ready to do their part. Small groups of neighbors patrolled the streets during the day, talking quietly to one another and checking on each home to ensure no one else had been hurt. The local police had not wasted any time. Officers were methodically following leads, reviewing security footage from nearby businesses, and interviewing anyone who might have seen the attackers. Maria's description of the men, along with Hank's precise observations, gave the authorities a solid starting point. They knew the men had fled toward the outskirts of town, likely hoping the night would hide them. Now, with the town on alert and the daylight helping visibility, the police felt confident they could track the attackers before they struck again. Maria, though still recovering from the physical and emotional pain of the attack, was determined to help however she could. She met with the officers, going over every detail she could remember. She described the attackers' height, build, and clothing, as well as the direction they had run and even small mannerisms she had noticed. The officers listened intently, asking gentle but detailed questions. Every piece of information was important. Maria realized that by speaking up, she was not only helping herself but also protecting others in the town from a similar danger. Hank, meanwhile, quietly checked in with the police from time to time. He described the attackers' movements, recalled the street layout, and even offered insights based on his knowledge of the surrounding areas. His practical understanding of the terrain and the way people moved through the town made him an invaluable resource. Despite being a humble man who preferred quiet work on his ranch, his calm observation and willingness to help had become a crucial part of the investigation. As the day went on, the town began to feel the impact of community involvement. Shopkeepers placed extra lighting around their storefronts, making dark corners less appealing to anyone who might consider doing harm. Neighbors spoke to one another about ways to watch the streets safely without putting themselves at risk. Some installed motion-sensitive lights, while others organized small volunteer groups to be aware of unusual activity in the neighborhood. The small acts of vigilance created a network of care, a protective fabric woven through the town that reminded everyone that they were not alone. By late afternoon, the police had received a promising tip. A local farmer reported seeing two men matching the descriptions given by Maria and Hank near an abandoned barn on the edge of town. Officers quickly moved to the location, accompanied by a few volunteers familiar with the terrain. They approached cautiously, calling out as they moved through the open field. The men had been careless, and the daylight had revealed details that the darkness had hidden the night before. When the police arrived at the barn, they found evidence linking the men to the attack. Torn pieces of clothing, footprints in the soft soil, and the bag Maria had carried, abandoned and damaged, were enough to confirm the connection. The officers quickly organized a strategy to intercept the attackers, knowing they were nearby. Communication with headquarters ensured that reinforcements could arrive quickly if needed. The town's collective awareness had made it far more difficult for the men to escape unnoticed. Back in her home, Maria followed the updates with a mix of anxiety and hope. Each message from the police reminded her that the men could be caught, and that her efforts, along with Hank's intervention, were making a real difference. She realized that even though the attack had been terrifying, it had also sparked a chain of events that demonstrated courage, community, and the importance of taking action. For the first time since the night of the attack, she felt a sense of agency. She was not just a victim, she was part of a solution. Neighbors continued to check in on her throughout the day, bringing meals, offering emotional support, and sharing their own experiences of noticing unusual activity around the town. The sense of solidarity was palpable. People who had previously remained isolated were now connected through a shared commitment to safety and vigilance. The town of Willow Creek, small and quiet as it was, began to feel alive with purpose. Everyone understood that protecting one another required attention, courage, and care. As evening approached, the police successfully located the attackers hiding near a wooded area on the outskirts. The men had underestimated the town's determination and the effectiveness of the coordinated effort. Officers approached carefully, giving clear warnings and instructions. The attackers, realizing they had been surrounded, surrendered without incident. There was no need for confrontation or violence, just careful planning, teamwork, and the willingness of the town to act. When Maria heard the news, relief washed over her in a wave. She had been terrified for so long, and now she could finally breathe knowing that the men who had hurt her were caught. But she also understood that the capture was not just about punishment. It was about restoring safety, justice, and trust. Her experience, though painful, had shown her that people could come together in meaningful ways to prevent harm and support one another. Hank, as always, remained humble. He knew that the success was not his alone. The police had done their jobs with skill, and the town's cooperation had made a critical difference. Yet, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that his decision to stop and help Maria had set the chain of events in motion. Without that moment of courage, the men might have escaped, and the town would have lost a chance to demonstrate its resilience. In the days that followed, Willow Creek began to settle back into a sense of normalcy, though with a new awareness of safety and community. Streets were brighter, neighbors more attentive, and the story of Maria's attack became a lesson for everyone. People discussed ways to maintain vigilance, to support those in need, and to ensure that courage and kindness were part of their everyday lives. Maria, with Hank's quiet support, continued to heal physically and emotionally. She found strength in her recovery and pride in the role she had played in helping the town take action. The event also sparked conversations about personal responsibility and awareness. Town meetings included discussions about community safety, the importance of looking out for each other, and the value of acting when someone is in danger. People who had been passive before realized that their actions, or lack of action, could have profound effects. Maria's story, combined with Hank's intervention and the collective effort of the town, became a source of inspiration and guidance for everyone. Through it all, Maria grew more confident. She walked the streets with her head held high, no longer paralyzed by fear. She learned to trust her instincts, to take precautions without letting them control her, and to believe in the goodness of those around her. Hank's example remained a guiding influence. Courage need not be loud or showy. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and profoundly effective. By the end of Part 4, the town of Willow Creek had changed. The attackers had been caught, the immediate danger had passed, and a culture of awareness and care had begun to take root. Maria had survived a frightening ordeal, yet she emerged stronger, wiser, and more aware of the power of community and courage. The experience had shown her that even ordinary people could make extraordinary differences when they chose to act. In the days that followed the capture of her attackers, Maria slowly began to feel a sense of relief she had not felt since that frightening night. The town of Willow Creek had returned to its usual quiet pace, but for Maria, life had changed forever. Each morning she woke with a lingering awareness of how fragile safety could be, yet she also carried a new sense of strength and resilience. The bruises on her arms and legs were fading, but the emotional marks remained, reminding her of the courage she had found within herself. Hank continued to quietly check in on her. He never demanded attention or recognition, but his presence became a source of comfort for Maria. They often met at her kitchen table, sharing a cup of tea or talking about the simple rhythms of daily life. Hank's calm, patient nature helped Maria to process what had happened. He never pressured her to talk about the attack, but his steady support allowed her to open up in her own time. She began to see that healing was not something that happened all at once. It was a gradual process, made possible by small acts of care and reassurance. Maria's friends and family played an essential role in her recovery as well. Her younger brother, once frightened and unsure how to respond, had learned to offer gentle encouragement and company. Her mother was vigilant but careful not to smother her, allowing Maria to regain independence while still providing guidance and protection. These small, daily gestures reminded Maria that she was not alone, and that support could take many forms, whether a kind word, a shared meal, or simply a presence that said, "I am here for you." As she regained confidence, Maria began to reflect on what had happened and how it had changed her. She realized that fear, while powerful, did not have to dominate her life. She took small steps each day, walking to the store alone for short errands, visiting the park, and even joining a local community group that organized safety patrols and neighborhood watch initiatives. Each step was an act of courage in its own right, a way of reclaiming her sense of independence and showing herself that she was capable of moving forward. The town of Willow Creek, inspired by the events of that week, had taken lasting measures to ensure safety. Streetlights were brighter, residents communicated more openly, and a culture of vigilance and care had taken root. Maria often walked through the streets that had once terrified her, noticing the subtle changes, the newly installed lights, the neighbors chatting across fences, the small groups keeping watch quietly. Each detail was a reminder that her experience had sparked a broader transformation, turning fear into action and hope. Hank's role in the recovery went beyond just being there for Maria. He spoke at town meetings and local gatherings about the importance of noticing when someone might be in danger and responding with care. He emphasized that courage was not about confrontation or heroics. It was about paying attention, taking action when necessary, and providing support to those in need. His words resonated deeply with the community, encouraging people to be observant, compassionate, and responsible. Maria also found her own voice. She shared her story with local schools, community groups, and friends, not to create fear, but to teach others about resilience, safety, and the value of speaking up. She spoke honestly about her fear, her pain, and the moments when she felt helpless, but she also highlighted the importance of hope, support, and courage in overcoming those moments. Her story became a symbol for the town, showing that even ordinary people could make a difference when they chose to act. One afternoon, Maria visited Hank at his ranch. She had grown comfortable in his presence, and their friendship had deepened into a bond of mutual respect and trust. She brought a small basket of food as a gesture of thanks, and they spent the afternoon talking, laughing, and sharing stories of their daily lives. Maria realized that while the night of the attack had been terrifying, it had also introduced her to a kind of courage and humanity she had never fully appreciated before. Hank's quiet strength and willingness to help had been a turning point in her recovery, and she felt grateful every time she thought of him. During that visit, Maria reflected on the larger lessons of her experience. She understood that life could be unpredictable and that danger could appear when least expected. But she also knew that moments of fear did not define a person. What mattered was how one responded, how one reached out for help, and how one allowed others to offer support. Hank's example had taught her that courage could be quiet and unassuming, yet profoundly impactful. She realized that even small acts of kindness could change the course of someone's life. As the weeks passed, Maria's confidence continued to grow. She no longer avoided the streets or felt anxious when walking alone. The memory of the attack remained, but it no longer controlled her. She had faced fear, survived, and found allies in both Hank and her community. Each day she moved with greater assurance, and she took joy in simple routines, preparing meals, walking through the park, and visiting neighbors. Her resilience became a source of inspiration for those around her, demonstrating that recovery was possible even after trauma. The town of Willow Creek, too, had changed in subtle but meaningful ways. People were more attentive, neighbors more connected, and a culture of care had become part of daily life. The incident that had once cast a shadow over the town now became a reminder of the strength of community, the importance of vigilance, and the power of courage. Maria felt proud to be part of this change, knowing that her experience had helped create a safer, more compassionate environment for everyone. One evening, Maria and Hank watched the sun set over the ranch. The sky was painted with shades of orange, pink, and purple, and the air was calm and peaceful. Maria reflected on how far she had come, from fear and helplessness to confidence and resilience. She realized that the events of that night, while frightening, had also revealed the strength and goodness in people, including herself. Hank's steady support, the community's vigilance, and her own courage had all combined to turn a terrifying experience into a story of hope and transformation. In the quiet of the evening, Maria smiled. She knew that life would always have challenges, but she also knew that she was stronger than she had realized. The fear that once seemed overwhelming had been replaced with a sense of agency and confidence. She had survived, learned, and grown, and she knew that she would carry these lessons with her for the rest of her life. Hank, modest as ever, reminded her that courage was often quiet. It did not require recognition or praise, only awareness, compassion, and action. Maria understood this deeply now. She realized that she, too, could make a difference, that her story could inspire others, and that the bonds of trust, care, and support were among the most powerful forces in the world. By the end of Part 5, Maria had fully embraced her recovery. She continued her daily life with renewed confidence, building relationships, contributing to her community, and honoring the lessons she had learned. The town of Willow Creek had emerged stronger as well, united by a shared commitment to safety and mutual care. The night that had once been filled with fear had ultimately created a story of courage, resilience, and hope, a story that would be remembered by the town and by Maria for years to come. Maria often reflected on that first night, remembering the terror, the pain, and the overwhelming sense of helplessness. But she also remembered Hank's calm voice, the steady presence that had guided her to safety, and the way her community had rallied around her. She understood that while darkness could appear suddenly, light, whether in the form of courage, kindness, or support, could follow just as quickly. And in that knowledge, Maria found peace.